Hello everyone. In this presentation, we'll be looking at features of effective writing so that you can improve all of your writing, but in particular, the essays that we'll be looking at in this unit. When we think of effective writing, when we think of a quality essay, we might think about the 6 traits of writing: the ideas, the organization, the voice, word choice, sentence fluency, and conventions that you've probably seen in many of your rubrics. And really, most of the things we're looking at do pertain to these categories, but I want to focus on them in a slightly different way in this presentation. We want to start, when we're writing an essay, by asking about our audience. Who are we writing for? And what is our purpose in writing? These are some things you want to be thinking about. The audience for your essay, and this would be a contemporary essay where you're writing about an issue of societal importance, an issue that's important to people today. The audience for your essay might be agreeable to your position. They might already have the same opinion that you do. And if that's the case, then because they already agree with you, they're just looking to confirm what they already believe and maybe expand what they know about it through your writing. But truthfully, you probably are going to get their agreement regardless of how effective your essay is. So you really, to be honest, don't have to try that hard if you're writing for an agreeable audience. If, however, you're writing for a neutral audience, someone that doesn't have a strong opinion, they may not know much about your topic, and that means that they may need background information from you in order to really make the connections. And it may help to have lots of examples. You could also find that you're writing for a disagreeable or skeptical or even opposed audience. And in that case, the reader might go in with a fixed mindset, and it's up to you to try to work with that mindset in how you construct your essay. The reader is probably going to question everything you say, so your arguments, your sources, your words need to be very powerfully and particularly well chosen. And the reader might soften his stance if you as a writer acknowledge some of the other positions related to your issue. So regardless of your issue in your essay, you're going to want to look at the audience and think carefully about who you're writing for and what that person or that type of person brings to your essay. So you'll want to think carefully about that and how it affects the writing that you construct. The purpose for your writing might be that you want to reinforce the existing viewpoints of your audience. It could be that you're wanting to convince your audience to avoid saturated fat and salty foods and fast foods. Pretty much most of us are aware that we need to do that. And so you simply want to reinforce this viewpoint by talking about the muck culture of ours. That might be your purpose for writing, and it's certainly a valid purpose. You might want to expand and deepen your audience's understanding of the topic. Maybe you have an audience that is already in agreement with you about Obamacare, but you want them to really understand the complexity of the issue. That could be another purpose for writing. It could also be that you want to shock your audience with information that they may not be aware of or information that may really change their attitudes. If you provide information, for example, about child slavery that still exists in the world, that is going to shock your reader, and that may be part of your purpose for writing. And lastly, you may be trying to motivate your reader into action. We are all aware that we should be taking our reusable bags to the grocery store and we should not be relying on plastic bags, but it may not be the case that we actually do that. So perhaps your purpose in writing would be to motivate people to take a new habit or to do a new action. Another purpose for writing. So when you write your essay, please give consideration to how your purpose is going to affect your writing. Why do you need to consider your audience and your purpose? A couple of weeks ago, my children were aware that the school fundraiser after school involved selling blizzards, and my children love sweets. Happened to be that day that their grandmother was picking them up. I might have been at some work session or something after school, but their grandmother was picking them up, and they knew that their grandmother had a soft heart and probably was going to buy them this ice cream. So they very carefully considered their audience and their purpose Their purpose was to motivate my mother into action to buy them the desired blizzards. And as they considered audience, they took a look at the types of words they used, the tone they used with those words, the organization of their information that they were giving, what information did they give first, and the support for it. They were going to share with my mother how this was going to benefit the Outdoor Lab program and help the whole school, which would, of course, buy into her ideals. So they were effective. They ended up with blizzards. But this is because they considered their audience and their purpose. So as you write your essay, I want you to think about the same thing. What are you trying to accomplish and who are you talking to? When you think about your audience and your purpose, that inevitably will affect your language, the types of words you use, the tone of your writing, the types of sentences you use. It will also affect your organization of ideas, the structures, the repetition, the paragraphing, where you place your thesis. And lastly, it will affect the type of support that you provide. If you're writing to an audience that's kind of hostile to your position, you're certainly going to need more valid support to try to persuade that person that you are correct. Let's take a look at the language first. We'll be talking about tone, which is the writer's attitude toward the topic, diction, which is the word choice and how you describe your topic, and syntax, which is the structure of our sentences, whether they're short, long, parallel, awkward, etc. Sometimes when we talk about tone, we think about the person's tone of voice. You may have heard your parents say, "Don't use that tone of voice with me." And that really is a way of saying, how do we gauge that person's attitude as he or she is talking? And the tone that we use in writing is the same thing as the tone of voice. It's the writer's attitude about the subject he's discussing. So you could be writing about Obamacare with praise or with a pleasant attitude or a positive attitude toward it, or you could be writing about Obamacare with derision or scorn. So the attitude is going to be very different, and that's going to affect the tone of your writing. The writing can be described with the same kinds of words you might give to a voice. It could be an angry voice, an angry tone. It could be sarcastic or cheerful or sympathetic. It could be a passive voice or passive tone. Could be an enthusiastic tone if you're trying to embrace a certain proposal. So think about what feeling you want your reader to go away with and the tone that you as a writer want to convey. That level of formality is another aspect of tone. Sometimes our writing is very informal. We use contractions, humor, casual remarks, lots of parenthetical comments, slang, simple words, and maybe even intentional run-ons and fragments like we looked at in Unit 2 with short stories. Sometimes your writing might be very formal. You might want to avoid contractions and say, "We are going to enforce this," instead of "We are gonna enforce this," or "We are not going to pursue a change," versus "We aren't going to pursue a change." So you might avoid contractions, use standard English conventions, remain serious, and be controlled. That would be very formal writing. Which would you use for convincing an agreeable audience? Which would you use for a more hostile audience or neutral audience? Think about that as you go on and look at levels of formality. Here's an example of how we can look at the formality and the tone of a piece of writing, or a sentence in this case. "This isn't the greatest apartment in the world, but it's really not that bad." We know it's kind of informal because of the use of contractions here, and it's more of a tolerant tone. You can imagine, so we're not saying this with an angry attitude about the apartment. We're not using it with a surprised attitude. It's probably a tolerant tone. Again, the writer's attitude toward the subject is going to influence the language. And that language could involve word choice. And this is where we get back to some of the 6 traits. The word choice could be abstract and general, or it could be commonplace, could be academic. But the diction depends on the connotation of the words. And that is really the feeling that goes with the words you're using. So it's the difference between saying a politician's stance on an issue versus the politician's spin on an issue. That shows a certain level of suspicion of the politician that stance does not. We can talk about trimming the budget, and it sounds all nice and neat and orderly. Or slashing the budget means that our attitude toward that budget process is probably not very positive. We can speak of an inebriated man, and that shows a certain level of respect that the word drunkard does not. Or the words we choose impact how the reader takes this. And lastly, we can talk about undocumented immigrants versus illegal immigrants, and those carry a very different emotional meaning. So examples of diction, word choice, something you'll want to think about as a writer. The last part of the language that we want to look at is syntax, which is basically the order and structure of sentences, often inverted by Yoda and Shakespeare. But well-structured, well-chosen sentences can have different effects on the reader. Those sentences might be short, long, repetitive, or parallel. For example, John F. Kennedy motivated Americans to go to the moon using very repetitive and parallel structures. Why should we do this? We choose to do this. We choose. Because. It worked. We win. Likewise, Ronald Reagan is credited with some of the responsibility for ending the Cold War when he spoke at the Brandenburg Gate and used repetition and parallel structure here to convince the world that it was time for that blockade to end. Sometimes a short sentence is going to work particularly well to emphasize a point, as in this essay by Deborah Tannen, My Mother, My Hair, when she uses a short sentence to turn the point, to turn the attention to what her main point is. Sometimes that longer sentence is going to work to emphasize a key point, as in President Obama's 2009 inaugural address, when he used this very long passage with lots of semicolons and colons and kind of a more complex sentence to get people thinking about the messages you want to convey, the values, the things that all Americans could feel and identify with. So language is powerful, and so is organization. Repetition can occur at the sentence level, but it can also occur at the level of the essay. Paragraphing can be used creatively as well, as can thesis placement, where you want to put your thesis in the essay. So take a quick look at that. Sometimes, just as we organize around repetitious phrases, we can organize entire essays around patterns. As in this essay, What is Poverty?, written in 1971 by Joe Goodwin Parker, in which every single paragraph begins with the point she wants to drive home. Poverty is, poverty is, poverty is. And it actually continues for about 6 or 7 paragraphs that way. Likewise, organization can be manipulating the paragraphing so that you have a single sentence line that wants to emphasize a point. Dave Barry is a humorist, and he writes on the difference between men and women, and he talks about what happens when Fred and Martha begin considering how long they've been dating. You realize we've been seeing each other 6 months, and then there's silence in the car. Similarly, organization can involve rearranging and putting the thesis at the end, as in this essay, In Praise of the F Word, and the F word is failure, in which the author is talking about how schools typically pass students along and they often don't know what they're doing, but her thesis comes at the very end of the essay. It's time that we go back to allow a policy where we allow students to fail. It doesn't appear at the beginning. So organization and language are effective, but it also requires support. Got to have your facts and statistics to back up your point, as well as quotations from an authority figure. And you'll want to use extended examples in order to convince your reader that your thesis, your point, is correct. So, in summary, effective writing begins with an examination of audience and purpose, and that is inevitably going to affect the language that you use, the tone, the diction, the syntax, the organization, the paragraphing, repetition, paragraph breaks, and thesis, and finally the support that you use, the types of facts and statistics, the quotations, and the extended examples that you provide. Now let's take a look at some actual essays and consider these types of techniques that you're going to be using when you write yourself. Great listening. Let's move forward.